and one of the oldest mission schools in South Africa. Marian Hill sits on huge tracts of land. These tracts of land were stolen from the Zulu people by a missionary called Chimlet. And even to this day, the people of Marian Hill can tell you that that man was not just a missionary, he was also a crook and a pitiless exploiter of the black people. He was a monk, but he was much more than a monk. It was said that this Chimlet worshipped not God, not the Virgin Mary, but Satan himself.
So that fits like a glove from the way the Illuminati were. And the other thing that must have happened, fundamental in so many ways, is that the original knowledge, the knowledge that you carry and people like you carry, must have been destroyed, pushed underground, and basically the true story of history lost.
Yes, sir. Let me tell you what the missionaries did. The missionaries used to employ the tactic of preaching the so-called gospel to our people. And at the same time, they used to manipulate our people into parting with some of their holiest relics. Please, sir, there is in London a place that I saw near the London docks in an obscure street. It is a heavily guarded warehouse which belongs to the British Museum of Humankind. We were allowed to visit this place when I was in London in 1997. And there, in that warehouse, I saw cupboard after cupboard after cupboard filled with priceless African artifacts in ivory, in bronze, in various indigenous woods, and sometimes in iron and in gold. I saw royal bangles from dead kings, bangles made of brass and bronze, bangles which showed every sign that they had been removed by force from the arms of dead men and dead women. All these things, I was told, had been collected by Theophilus Chepstone and the London Missionary Society and were sent to this museum where no African is allowed to view them. I was lucky because I was accompanied by a white woman whose father, I suspect, was a Freemason. Now, let me tell you, sir, what the missionaries did also. The missionaries established hospitals in their mission stations. Reverend Moffat had a hospital in that mission station. And when an African was brought there, sick unto death, the missionary used to tell this African that as a condition to his entering the hospital, he first had to be baptized as a Christian. And also as another condition for entering the hospital and receiving missionary treatment, the sick African had to surrender all artifacts from his ancestors that he had in his possession. One day, sir, my grandfather Zid had an accident. He had bought himself an ox wagon, but he did not know how to control it. And one day the ox wagon plunged off a cliff, and my grandfather was badly injured. And when he was taken to a mission hospital in the west of Zululand, the first thing that the missionary said to my grandfather was this, that he knew, the missionary, that my grandfather owned a heap of metal objects which he kept in one of his huts, and that as a condition for receiving treatment for his broken bones, he had to surrender all that metal property to the missionary. Those things you have got in your home are full of evil spirits, said the missionary reverently. You must let me have them, so that I can take them to a holy place in England, where they would be destroyed. My grandfather stood up shakily and walked out of the mission hospital. He walked, and somewhere along the road he collapsed. And tribespeople who knew him took him to their village. And there, when a passing Afrikaner doctor rode by in his ox wagon, the black people asked this doctor, who was not a missionary, to please take care of my grandfather. The doctor took my grandfather aboard his ox wagon and took him to his farm far away. And there, the Afrikaner doctor, a herbalist really, as he was called, a Genees Jeren, he treated my grandfather free of charge, and he didn't place any conditions for his treatment. And my grandfather, out of gratitude, returned to his village, a healthy man, and took 3 fat cows and led them with his sons to the faraway home of the Afrikaner. Again and again, our people were robbed of their heritage. Our people were robbed of scientific equipment. Our people were robbed of irreplaceable artifacts, some of them dating back hundreds of years into the past, by the missionaries, especially the London Missionary Society. And if you go into that museum, sir, near the docks in London, you will find what I saw, and it will move you.
What's your own experience in your life, Fredo, of the use of Christianity in Africa to divide, rule, and suppress the people?
Now, let me tell you. When missionaries came to South Africa, they deliberately created a huge wave of enmity between those blacks that they converted and those blacks who resisted Christian conversion, they created such a divide that they actually broke up huge families. And it got worse when Catholics, Anglicans, Methodists, and Presbyterians spread through South Africa. There was developed deliberately in Africans of different religious denominations the same enmity that exists now between the Catholics and the Protestants in England. Black Protestants were forbidden from talking to black Catholics. Black Wesleyans did not even ask the time of day from black Presbyterians. It was such a total chaos, and the only beneficiaries were the missionaries themselves. But let me tell you more what is to be done. Missionaries used to forbid any converted Christian black from having anything whatsoever to do with an unconverted black. Love relationships between so-called heathen blacks and Catholic blacks were forbidden by the missionaries. That was how my father and my mother parted, traumatizing my life even before I was born. My father had been a confessing Catholic, and he fell in love with what was called a heathen Zulu woman. Now, the condition for such a love was that the woman had to submit herself into the Christian faith. And my grandfather, a fierce old warrior, contemptuously refused to have my mother become a Christian convert. I used to kill white men at Isandlwa, and I am not going to allow a daughter of mine to follow the religion of spear food. And say, if in a mission station a church-going black paid court to a heathen black, the church-going black was brutally punished by the missionary, and he was punished in a way which to Africans was horrible. Inside the mission church, there were the pews, the benches on which the congregation sat. But next to the door, just as you entered the door of the church, there were special benches for those Christian blacks who had broken the law. And so, if it was found by the white missionary or the black missionary that a certain person had had anything to do with a heathen, that person was punished in a very terrible way. He or she was made to sit next to the door of the church inside, so that all who entered the church would look at this one and know that here is a lawbreaker who had broken the laws of Jesus Christ.
Were you pushed into the Christian religion to start with prayer before the penny dropped?
Yes, I was. You see, after my mother and my father had separated, my mother gave birth to me. And for a long time, I suffered as a child because I was born illegitimate. I was called a bastard. I had no rights as a human being. The law of the Zulus at that time was very, very strict regarding illegitimate children. My mother suffered. She was often beaten up by other girls in the village. And I suffered too. Other children were forbidden from playing with me. And I herded cattle in the bush alone. And there, many strange things happened to me, which do not concern us here, however. And when I was 7 years old, there came to my grandfather's village a brother of my father, and he asked to take me away from there. And my grandfather said, nothing could please me more than that this little bastard should be removed from my home. He is a disgrace to my family. And so I was taken by my father's brother to the south of Natal, where I was baptized as a Catholic, and the ridiculous name Credo was placed upon my head, a name I hate very much even to this day. I grew up, sir, as a Catholic, and we were all Catholics in our home, as most people in Natal are. And then one day, after we had left Natal, my father left the Catholic Church and adopted one of the worst branches of the Christian religion that you can find. My father started following the teachings of an American woman called Mary Baker Eddy. She, who was the leader of the Christian Science Church. Under the laws of the Christian Science Church, you are not allowed to take medicine under any circumstances, no matter how seriously ill you are. And for years we suffered, my half-sisters and my half-brothers and I. We sickened and we were not allowed to take any medicament. We had suffered before under the Catholic Church, having to confess sins every weekend to a priest we could barely see. Sometimes it was so ridiculous that we often created sins against ourselves we had not committed in order to please the Catholic Father. And now we were suffering under the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy, teachings which I now see in my adult life as having been the very essence of the purest rubbish. Then, after a great sickness in 1927, I was taken, during that great sickness, I was taken back to Zululand by my father's brother, Anton. And there, I was healed by a man I had been conditioned to be looked upon as a stupid heathen, mainly my grandfather, the father of my mother. After that, sir, I began to see how great the knowledge that the black people possessed was. I began to see that the missionaries were actually deceiving us, that they were teaching us lies at school about our people. And then one day I got into serious trouble. I was now a budding artist, painting pictures for the mission school. And I made the mistake of portraying the Virgin Mary as a Zulu woman, based upon my mother's face. And I portrayed Jesus Christ as a Zulu boy. And for that, I was caned and expelled from school. The reason I was not caned by the white missionary only. I was caned also by the black teachers who accused me of having insulted Jesus Christ by painting him as a black. So you can see the stark mental confusion into which our people had been plunged. Men caning a boy because he had painted Christ as a black man, and saying that by blackening Christ's face, this boy had blasphemed.
Just makes you see, Credo, how easy it is for the few to control the world when most of the world gives its mind away.
Yes, sir, but one must understand, Mr. David, that we human beings are weak creatures. We fall victim to ill health. We fall victim to sometimes nameless fear. And that is where the forces of darkness pounce upon us when we are afraid, sick, or insecure. Many black people who were converted easily to Christianity were people who had been traumatized by war. You see, during the great Zulu wars in Natal, thousands of black men and women used to run away from Zululand to Durban, where huge refugee camps, bigger than anything we have ever seen in Africa, soon blossomed. These refugee camps were fertile ground for Christian missionary operations. These refugee camps were places where many a self-seeking missionary was sure of walking away with several hundred converts.
Fredo, all these methods we've been talking about here can be connected to this one stream, unbroken under different names, that came out of London. The next major stream I'd like to look at was that represented by Cecil Rhodes in the British South Africa Company, which, from what I've seen, transformed, perhaps more than anything, the structure, the economy, and the life of South Africa. What about him and that time?
Many stories are told about Cecil Rhodes. Many stories. And one day I shall amuse you with one. Cecil Rhodes was a strange man. Like all great men, he was a weird mixture of great viciousness and mercifulness. Cecil Rhodes was a seeker after knowledge. And he used to do many things for those blacks who gave him the knowledge he sought. First, Cecil Rhodes was interested in legends that he had heard about Africa and the Africans. He wanted to know where our people used to mine minerals. And his men used to go from village to tribal village, carrying cheap blankets, traveling shawls, and Stetson hats to bribe tribe people into showing them where mines were, ancient African mines were. In fact, I can tell you, sir, that many of the mineral deposits that are in South Africa, from the diamonds of Kimberley in the Cape to the coal fields of Natal, to the gold mines of the Witwatersrand and of the land now known as Zimbabwe, all these mineral deposits were pointed out to Rhodes and his men by Africans. Africans willing to do anything to impress this strange white man. Cecil Rhodes smiled very often, especially before he ordered the slaughter of an entire tribe. Cecil Rhodes got to know how deeply our people respected a powerful man who reconciled two clashing factions. And one amazing thing, when confronted by black people who were asking him pointed questions, Cecil Rhodes used to deny that he was the leader of the white people, for example, in Rhodesia. He acted like a third party, a man who was dedicated to reconciling black and white and stopping conflict between them. And until he died, Cecil Rhodes was known by the Mandebele people as Mlamlankunzi, the brave one who passed two clashing bulls. At one time, Cecil Rhodes went to a very holy place, and a group of hills called Ndabazenduna, and there, under a tree whose remains can still be seen, Cecil Rhodes sat with a group of Mandebele elders and actually persuaded them to stop warlike actions against the British Empire.
How did he manipulate the black tribes of Africa so that he got all these mineral rights, which have now become consolidated gold fields and De Beers and Anglo-American?
Cecil Rhodes used to walk about completely unafraid amongst the Mandebele people, and he used to tell them to attack the Mashona people, whom he called dogs. And in this way, Cecil Rhodes caused wars between blacks, which he then stepped in as an intercessor. Cecil Rhodes built up a formidable hatred between the Matebele's and the Mashonas. He played the Matebele's off against the Mashonas and the same the other way around. What is strange about Cecil Rhodes was that, and which is never revealed in the many books that were told about him, was that Cecil Rhodes was a student in search of the deepest mysteries of Africa. He made friends with healers, with shamans, and he actually took part in their rituals. And through them, he revealed in the many books that were told about him, was that Cecil Rhodes was a student in search of the deepest mysteries of Africa. He made friends with healers, with shamans, and he actually took part in their rituals. And through them, he learned of the many secret and holy places which were to be found in the land that now bore his name, Rhodesia. And one of these holy places that he learned about was those hills upon whose summits you see great boulders, namely the Matobo Mountains, the mountains of the great boulders. There, Rhodes learned that the most powerful kings of the Mashona and the Makaranga people lay buried. And he decreed that after death, he too should be buried there.
Isn't that very much linked to legends and stories of the Chitahuli and the reptilians?
Yes, sir. The Matobo Mountains are held even today as one of the places on earth where the Chitahuli are often seen and where they land in their craft. And there is more, sir, regarding this thing. Much more. Cecil Rhodes had himself buried above the grave of a much older leader and a far greater man than himself. We are told, sir, that the first Munomotapa, a remote ancestor of mine, Nyatsimbi Mutola, died and was buried in the Matopo Mountains. And Cecil Rhodes found the place where Nyatsimbi lies buried. And he ordered that he should be buried on higher ground than Nyatsimbi. And by so doing, he showed the Matebele and the Mashona people in death that he, John Rhodes, was far superior to Nyatsimbi Mutola.
How did Rhodes' influence in the creation of the mines and the whole basis of what's even now the modern South African economy, how did that affect the people in terms of control and losing control of their destiny?
First of all, sir, our people totally ignored the large mining operations that they soon saw taking place in their country. Our people were happy to stay in their villages. But new laws were instituted by the colonial government of Natal especially, where all able-bodied men were forced to go on a long distance journey by foot to work for starvation wages in the diamond fields of Kimberley. Many, many stories are told of brave black men and women who went to Kimberley to work in the town of Kimberley amongst all kinds of disease and corruption and violence, and also to work in the great hole of Kimberley, a hole which before had been the site of one of the holiest hills known to our people in that part of South Africa. Cecil Rhodes and his people did much to destabilize black family life in Natal and other places inhabited by black people. He forced the local chiefs to pay tax, they and their followers. He forced the chiefs to send their sons and the sons of their people to work in the diamond fields. He told them that if they refused to do this, he would call the soldiers from England to destroy them all. Tax was now demanded of our people, not in cattle, as had been the case before, but in gold sovereign. So a young man had to go, leave his father's home, and go by foot over the Drakensberg Mountains, walk great distances to Kimberley, and there to work for one gold sovereign a year, a sovereign which would then be turned over to the chief, who would in his turn turn it over to the colonial authorities as tax.
The South African company, the British South African company of Cecil Rhodes, created so much of the economy of South Africa that we see today. And this has been taken over by other companies, not least the ones controlled by the Oppenheimer family, who seem to be the Illuminati's branch managers in South Africa. They are involved in the Anglo-American Corporation, in De Beers Diamond Operation. Then there's another offshoot of the Rhodes network, which is the Lawn Road Company, London Rhodesia Company, which to me has grotesquely manipulated and abused Africa since its creation. What's your view of this post-Rhodes network that so controls South Africa today?
Right. In answering your question, I want to be very, very fair, because my philosophy as an African warrior priest commands me to be fair even to my deadliest enemies. The Anglo-American Corporation has done a lot of good in South Africa during the course of its existence. Sir Ernest Oppenheimer assisted in the building of several townships near Johannesburg. He did not do it for love, of course. He did not do it for altruistic reasons. But the fact was that on a massive scale, he and his company created roofs over the heads of many black families. In fact, a large part of Soweto, near Johannesburg, is his company's creation. But the Anglo-American Corporation also has a lot to answer for in front of the throne of God. This corporation has caused the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of black men in its mines. Now let me tell you, sir, a very, very heart-rending thing. I have evidence that can stand in any court that organizations such as the Anglo-American Corporation often overthrow African governments by what I call remote control. Not so long ago, a great friend of mine, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, was overthrown in Malawi. He was overthrown by mobs going on the rampage in nearly every city in his country. Before the overthrow of Dr. Banda, the Anglo-American Corporation and other gold mining corporations in South Africa had barred hundreds of Malawian miners from coming to seek a living in South Africa in the only way they know how, namely by mining. Why? Because it was believed that many Malawian gold miners suffer from AIDS. And when Dr. Banda's government was overthrown, amongst the thousands of people who stormed into the streets of Blantyre and other cities were enraged men who had been refused the right to come to South Africa to earn a living there. Again and again, I have seen this happen. Before the tragedy in Lesotho, mine workers were retrenched from the gold mines. And many of these mine workers were Basutus. They went to Lesotho, and there, when the country collapsed after the rigged elections of about a year ago, mine workers took to the streets and created the violence that brought about the demise of the Basotho nation, which we see today.
What about Lonro and its influence, and Tiny Rowlands, its late and infamous head?
Is he dead?
Yeah.
Rowland?
Mm-hmm.
Well. I wonder what he's going to say to Nkulunkulu, the great God, when he comes to the land of the ancestors. You know, sir, it's very strange that men like Rowland are just as perishable as we all are. Rowland was a genocide. He and his corporation were behind many of the bloodiest wars and coups d'etat in Africa. Wherever there was war, wherever there was the smuggling of heavy armaments, such as tanks and artillery pieces, there you heard the name Lonro. Tiny Rowland was a man whom I had heard about during the war, a man who openly sympathized with the Nazis. Tiny Rowland was a man who was directly behind the seizure of the country Rhodesia by Mr. Ian Smith, so-called UDI. He either facilitated it or he was directly responsible for it. Tiny Roland was one white man whom thousands of black people hated throughout Southern Africa. Our people called him Ngwena or Ingwenya, which means the chewing crocodile. One reason why Roland was so bitterly hated was because not far from the Victoria Falls, there is a small town called Wangi. That town was once a very, very sacred place to the Makaranga peoples. Wangi stands in what was once a huge forest, which was once sacred to the great Earth Mother in ancient times. Tiny Roland's men so heavily polluted that place in their mining operations that today it is a ravaged ghost of its former self.
Isn't it the case, Credo, that these various names like Oppenheimer, like Rhodes, like Roland, are actually puppets of a force we call the Illuminati? And is it your view, from your experience, that the Illuminati and the Chitahuli, the reptilians, are actually the same thing, and that actually through various forms it is the reptilian force that has been behind this whole story you've been articulating?
I think so, sir. In fact, I'm positive. But what I cannot understand is why do rational, highly educated human beings allow themselves to become the instrument of the destruction of the only home that we have, we human beings, namely the earth upon which we live. Please, sir, are you going to tell me that men like Mr. Oppenheimer and all those who work under him don't have what are called environment impact studies, which give them a long-term view of what the ultimate results of their massive mining operations will be?
Of course, they will have that done, but as we've discussed in another video, maybe destroying the environment is part of the agenda in terms of changing the planet from one which suits humans to one which suits the people that have been controlling you.
Yes, sir. But this seems to be a terrible war that we see in front of us. A war which is taking place relentlessly, cold-bloodedly, and whose effects upon all our lives and upon the planet are becoming more evident as we go into the millennium.
When you follow these bloodlines, which have become the Illuminati, the reptilian bloodlines, through history to the present day, you can see very clearly that human sacrifice, blood rituals, and so on have followed them all the way. I mean, the bloodlines, for some reason, are seriously into this stuff. Has that been your experience in terms of the secret societies and the reptilian bloodlines that you've experienced?
Other than necrophagy, where a human corpse or part of a human corpse is eaten. I have never seen an actual human sacrifice, but I have taken part in rituals where part of a dead body is consumed. A dead body dug up from a grave. I must admit that. But in England and in America, I saw Freemasons indulging in some of their deepest rituals. And in both cases, the people concerned were not aware of the fact that they were being observed. At one time in Johannesburg, I viewed a Freemason ritual through a pair of binoculars. They were performing this ritual in a brightly lit room, and we watched nearly every detail of what they were doing. In England, I saw again the same thing close up. And again, the people concerned were not aware of my presence, or the presence of the friend who had brought me to see what was happening. You know, sir, before I go deep in answering your question, can I ask you, sir, are you a religious man?
No.
Good. Then another question, sir. Please. It is African courtesy that I should ask questions just as you ask me questions. Please, sir, exactly why do human beings or the Chitauri perform human sacrifice? What is the reason behind this ghastly practice?
Well, first of all, from people I've spoken to who've taken part in these rituals, they tell me there's something in the blood which they want to consume because for some reason they need it, and it appears that they want blonde-haired, blue-eyed people for that more than any other. And the other thing, I guess, is that if you can perform a very malevolent, terrifying ritual in a particular vortex point, then you're going to affect the energy field very powerfully. And another reason which we've talked about is that at the point of sacrifice, this evil eye, this hypnotic stare, which these Chitahuli crossbreeds and the Chitahuli themselves seem to have, can suck a person's energy consciousness out of their body.
Yes, sir. But are you aware, Mr. David, that people performing human sacrifice perform it for very, very serious and in a strange way, diabolically logical reasons, and very, very selfish ones?
Go ahead.
Sir, there is something about human sacrifice which I beg to reveal to you. I am an initiate of over 7 great initiations, and I have learned many things which would shock a saint. And one of these is this: the basic reason behind human sacrifice is immortality, or rather longevity. When a great person feels that he or she is about to die, that great person does this. He or she orders the kidnapping of a particularly beautiful young person, usually a woman, a young girl, a virgin. But this virgin must have certain spiritual characteristics. And these characteristics must be certain qualities of the mind. In short, the victim must be psychic. The victim must be very beautiful. And the first thing that is done with the victims, she is not killed outright. She is, how you say, she is, oh God, how can one say it? She is stripped naked, and she is bound hand and foot, and then you, the one about to sacrifice her, lie naked in the same bed with her, but you do not have sex with her. Because if you do, the energy that you are building up for yourself will dissipate. You must lie with the victim. Usually she is blindfolded. And you must embrace her and hold her and make and try to symbolically swallow her. To try to draw from her the most important essence of herself. I'm sorry, I don't have the proper English to say this. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Your body must be moistened with fragrant oil, and so the body of the victim to be. And you must embrace this victim for a number of days.
You try to make a vibrational connection with them, is that what you
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In fact, I can tell you, kings and inyangas and sangomas who lived well beyond their 100th year by simply taking a young virgin person, whether male or female, and lying with him or her in a ritual bed without any sexual penetration whatsoever. This is the key to true immortality. This, I am telling you now, something which I am not allowed to